This new car exhibit at the Vanderbilt Museum in Centerport showcases a 1909 Gentleman's Reo Roadster. The museum says this historic car has a lot to teach about the development of automobiles.
The Gentleman's Roadster is very similar to the one that actually ran in the early Vanderbilt Cup races. So we're displaying it today for the first time in decades as a race car.
The car was gifted to the museum in the late 1950s and hasn't been on display since the 70s.
It has been restored here and there over the years. Most recently, it was restored through the generosity of a donor, and we have some new paint added, and it has been cleaned up, and it really looks marvelous. It was very dirty and dusty in storage, and now it's back on display and in good condition.
Now back then they had to make several modifications to the Reo Gentleman's Roadster to get it ready to race.
We removed the fenders and the lights so that they wouldn't get filled with mud on the dirt race course. And we affixed a removable number that would have run in the race as a numbered contestant.
William K. Vanderbilt II was himself a racing car enthusiast. In fact, he even drove.
He had broken a speed record in 1904 down in Ormond Beach. 92 miles an hour he did in his car, and was very proud of that, and it really gave him the racing bug, so to speak. Well, when he came out here to Long Island, don't forget Long Island was a much different place 100 years ago, now over 100 years ago. There weren't many accessible roadways or paved roadways for motorists. It wasn't developed to the suburban area that it is today. Well, a lot of this, and what you see today as today's Long Island, is a direct result of Mr. Vanderbilt's early efforts. He decided he wanted to locate the car races out here, and that was partly in response to the European dominance of fast automobiles. He wanted American car makers, many of whom were his friends, such as Louis Chevrolet and Henry Ford, to build equal cars that could compete with the European counterparts. So he gave them a venue in which to do that on the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway. He formed the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway Corporation, along with many stockholders, and in 1904 they had their first race in October. Now, back then it was a dirt roadway, and it was very precarious as far as the spectators watching from very closely on the sidelines, and in 1906 someone actually got killed along the road. It was very tragic. People were complaining, and they actually suspended the races. In 1908, the races came back with a vengeance. Mr. Vanderbilt actually constructed the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway. It was a paved concrete road, and it's a 30-mile race course. And Mr. Vanderbilt's always officiated at these races. People don't realize that he actually never drove in the races. He never competed. As the president of the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway Corporation, I guess that would have been a conflict of interest, but he very much enjoyed being a part of the races and officiating. He always dressed as though he were going to race. He had his racing goggles and his jodhpurs and his whole racing ensemble on, and he would often stand at the finish line and the start line. He's pictured there many, many times over the years.
Now, the big prize everyone was competing for in these races was the prestigious Vanderbilt Cup.
It was equivalent to hockey's Stanley Cup. Mr. Vanderbilt had Tiffany fashion this cup. It was 30 pounds of sterling silver, absolutely beautiful. And it pictured a car on one side, and it had Mr. Vanderbilt's name on the other side, and it was a very prestigious trophy and handed to the winner each year.
The popularity of these races also helped develop Long Island as a place to live.
People came out to see these races by the thousands. Actually, they say hundreds of thousands over the years. They came out via the Long Island Railroad, and along the side of these roads, many times, savvy entrepreneurs set up little booths selling Long Island real estate, parcels of land on which to build their new homes, and it was very enticing to people with little bits of money who could come out here and hope for a beautiful suburban life, and many of them chose to do that.
The Vanderbilt Museum says there's a lot to be learned about the development of automobile transportation through studying these early race cars.
It is important to have this car, even though it's not original to Mr. Vanderbilt. on display, because I think it gives people a feel for the type of vehicles that were in these races and how small they were and how they didn't have the safety features our cars have today. There were no seat belts. They actually removed the windshield as well for these, so that while you were racing at your high speeds with your goggles on, mud would be hitting you in the face, and that was the mechanician who rode with the driver. I'm sure that was one of his duties, is to wipe the goggles off every now and then so the driver could actually see where he was going.
The Reo Gentleman's Roadster is on display here next to Mr. Vanderbilt's Lincoln. The idea is to give you a sense of the difference between a race car and a luxury car of the day.
The Lincoln was a very luxurious car for the time. Mrs. Vanderbilt actually had the fenders replaced with leather ones in favor of metal, so that the stones from the road wouldn't make such a racket while they rode. So here we have racing, bare bones, stripped down car ready for action. And on the other side, we have an authentic Vanderbilt piece, which Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt rode in, and was the lap of luxury and the state of the art.
For more information on how and when you can see this historic race car, check out the website vanderbiltmuseum.org. And if you'd like to learn more about the races themselves and the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway, check out the website vanderbiltcupraces.com. In Centerport, Collora reporting.